Okay, welcome. Thank you all for being here. I am Nick Kanoki, the producer of ALN Thursday at 4, where every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we will put a light on important and relevant asset leadership and asset management topics. One note before I introduce today's host, you may notice as an attendee that your video and audio are muted by default in Zoom webinars. So if you'd like to say something, either write it in the chat or wait for the open Q&A at the end. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Bordenero and Jack Kelly.
Thank you, Nick. Nick is also our tech assistant, and he will be turning off his camera now, but we'll see him again later. And I am broadcasting from Chicago, and it's my pleasure to start this Asset Leadership Network at Thursdays at 4 with a very special guest, Jack Kelly. Jack has a storied career. He started with Governor Jimmy Carter's administration in Georgia, and Jimmy Carter brought him to DC and put him in the Office of Management and Budget, where he worked on government reorganization and stayed for 36 years and worked on many impactful initiatives. Jack has brought that penchant for impact to the ALN, where he is a board member, a senior fellow, and has led many initiatives that position our organization as having an impact in the US and around the world. It's been my pleasure to work closely with Jack and to gain a personal relationship with Jack, who enjoys good food and good wine and gardening. So I'm going to start by asking, what's blooming in the garden, Jack?
Well, Mike, I'm glad you asked. Take a look.
Oh, wait, Jack, before I do that, I want to thank our sponsors. Our organizational members is what's making this possible, and we're very grateful for their sponsorship and for their active involvement. This is a real great group of people, and it's a pleasure to be a part of them. So now, Jack, what's going on in the garden?
I like to share a picture of the way my garden looks right now. I live in Rockville, Maryland, and my wife and I have actually been enjoying having to be stuck at home, sheltering in place, because our backyard is kind of a nice place to have to shelter. And this year, unlike most years when we will do traveling in the spring and go various places and miss a lot of the blooming season, this year we've been stuck at home. So we've been able to see everything that's been blooming since early March. So it's been kind of enjoyable.
Yeah, I've been in that garden. It's wonderful all year round. So Jack, I gave a brief overview. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background so that when people hear what you're saying about listing for ISO 55001 certification and compliance, they understand where you're coming from.
So Mike, I began my government career in 1971 when I joined the Georgia Office of Planning and Budget. And this office was responsible for carrying out then Governor Carter's reorganization of the Georgia government. And it was a massive reorganization. It actually led to serious structural change, as well as improvements in the way of various management activities were managed. My specific reorganization team created the Georgia General Services Administration. Some of you familiar with the GSA in Washington might understand that link. So my experience with reorganization and management reform in Georgia, it resulted in me being invited to DC in 1977 to help plan then President Carter's federal reorganization project. When that project wound down in 1979, I began a series of interagency management reform initiatives that kept me busy for the rest of my career. All of these initiatives were focused on improving various administrative service functions, including federal travel, reducing federal workspace, accelerating surplus property sales, and other areas. What made my initiatives different from more typical OMB management initiatives was the involvement of agency administrative experts in the formulation of new policies, as well as in the oversight of policy implementation activities. I also made sure that GSA provided staff support to the different reform implementation efforts on a permanent basis. A very good example of this approach was an OMB circular A126 that I wrote dealing with the management of government aircraft. It basically set up a kind of a self-governing mechanism that was overseen by the agencies and supported by GSA.
So, Jack, let's chat about some of the things that were really good. What you did. I really like the fact that you set up the uh, Office of Government-Wide Policy at GSA. You told me a real good story about how that started.
Well, so the model, the kind of self-governing model that was created under the OMB Circular A126 became the model for setting up the Office of Government-Wide Policy. And it was set up because, in order to actually implement policies, it's a much bigger deal than issuing a press release saying we've got a new policy. So this more organic approach to reform basically is, some people call it change management, and it is an aspect of change management, but it was it was very successful. I mean, what happened was the normal model is OMB issues a policy and then walks away. This is where OMB helped involved agencies in developing the policies, issued the policy, and then made sure the agencies were supported in implementing the policies effectively. And we did that in travel, we did that in motor vehicle fleet management, we did it in mail management, we did it in transportation, we did it in aircraft. So it was a pretty fundamentally different way of implementing management reforms.
So that's a real good lead into your discovery of ISO 55000 and why you think it's important, because clearly you had a lot of experience with policy and strategy about management of assets.
So the way I got involved with ISO 55000 is that because after I retired in 2013, Jim Dieter and Jack Dempsey, two of the founders of the Asset Leadership Network, asked for a meeting with the Office of Government-Wide Policy, and they were promoting an executive order that would require agencies to adopt the standard. So OGP invited me to sit in on that meeting because they knew I had had experience with executive orders. And that's the first time I'd ever heard about ISO 55000. And after the meeting, I wanted to learn more about it. And so I was able to actually read a copy of it. And I was blown away. I mean, I thought, oh my God, this is such common sense. I wish I'd known this when I was actually working. And that got me very, very interested in learning more about the standard. And consequently, I joined the Asset Leadership Network.
Yes. So since you were so involved in policy, it does not surprise me that you are interested in the policy of how to list certified ISO 55001 certified companies and those that are compliant with the standard. So how did you transition to that activity, which you've done a lot of work on that paper, and it's good work, and that's what we're here to talk about.
Well, the way that came about was Michael Hardy, another ALN senior fellow, and I developed a paper back in 2018 that went over the history of asset management going way, way, way back, and then bringing it up to the present day with ISO 55000. During the course of writing that paper, we decided it would be interesting to look at organizations around the world who had implemented the standard, because we thought that we could learn lessons from that. When we first tried to find information out about those organizations, we would go to the internet and we'd find little scattered stories here and there. It wasn't much. Fortunately, before we finished the paper, Jim Dieter pointed out a website that ISO technical committee, that's TC 251, which is the technical committee that focuses on asset management policies within ISO. They had a website that actually listed what they call the known certified organizations. And so we were able to pull down information from that website and give kind of an overview of what the world looked like in terms of implementation. And what was interesting, that there were 4 countries that had many more, 40 organizations per country versus like 7 organizations, or in the US, just 2 organizations that were actually certified to the standard. So that was in our initial paper, and that's how we got started.
So thanks for that background. One thing before we go on, will you share your healthcare analogy about the value of ISO 55000?
You bet. I mean, so we talked before about all these different, management reform efforts that I worked on. And a number of them had to do with different asset categories like aircraft, motor vehicles, personal property, real property. And once I read the standard, I realized that if you want to use a medical metaphor that worked for me, all of those reform initiatives that I worked on, and what most reform initiatives are Band-Aids. They're designed to fix a specific problem. Legislation is written like that too. It's a Band-Aid. We're gonna fix this, we're gonna fix that. The standard is a lifestyle change, or it's a prescription for a lifestyle change. It's much more comprehensive, and quite frankly, you're still gonna have the occasional Band-Aid requirement, but not as many and not as serious.
Okay, so you saw that ISO 55000 was a valuable document that could help organizations, and then you found that the listing of organizations that were certified and compliant weren't necessarily up to snuff. So what did you do from there?
Well, so after we issued that initial paper that had like our first look at that list of certified organizations, I got very curious about how that was changing over time. And so I started, like in 6 months increments, I would take another look at the list and compile statistics from the list. And sure enough, I mean, the number of organizations around the world increased. The number of sectors that were adopting ISO 55000 increased and expanded. And so the picture was changing. So I decided to do a little bit deeper dive and created a presentation that I gave at our fall event last year called Where in the World is ISO 55000 and Why? Because what I wanted to do was say, for those 4 countries that are really massively invested in implementing the standard, what's so different about them? What's causing them to be so different from the rest of the world? And so that presentation, by the way, is available on the ALN website. Maybe at the end we can talk about where, but it's available to people who want to go down that path and take a look at it. So what happened then was when I went to update that information for a possible presentation at this year's fall event, I decided to do a deeper dive into that list. And that list basically, it lists the name of the company, the country that it's in, and then there's a link that's provided to what's supposed to be evidence of certification. So I dove into that. And what I found was that not all of the evidence that was provided was really adequate for certification. The best evidence is like a link to the certificate, but some of the links were just to press releases that claim certification with no mention of who the certifying body was or anything about the actual certificate. So that got me, curious about that. So that was one problem. The other thing was I started getting, I heard stories that there were more certified organizations that were on the list. So I thought, well, let me see if I can't go find them. And so I learned about, this is where I sort of went into, Jim accuses me of going down rabbit holes a lot of times. And the rabbit hole I went down here turned out to be very, very productive. I learned about how the certification process works, how there's an accreditation process so that not anybody can come in and claim to be a proper certifying body. You have to be accredited to make that claim.
To make accreditations, you have to be accredited.
So there's a whole lot of bureaucracy around the implementation and certification of standards.
I wouldn't say it's bureaucracy so much as it is processes to establish validation.
That's a great way to say it. But when I say bureaucracy, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean, it's just there is a structure, there's organization structure that's created to get this work done. And it's 2 levels. It's the certifying body, and it's the organization that accredits the certifying bodies.
So one of our members, ABS, is a organization that provides certification.
An accredited certifying body, right?
Yes. So, all right. It was an incredible deep dive that you did. You did a thesis level of work in researching all of those entities and checking them. So why is it important to have these listed properly?
Before I go down that, before I answer that question, the other thing I want to mention is that there was a whole lot of brand new information when I found out about these accreditation bodies and so forth. And frankly, I had no background in it whatsoever. So I reached out to three people whose opinions I highly value, and they're from around the world. They're Jim Dieter, our CEO, who led the U.S. team that helped write ISO 55000. Also, a gentleman named Peter Kohler, who founded a group called the Asset Management Council in Australia, and also contributed to writing the standard. And then a man named Boudewijn Nijens, who works for IAM, and he's what they call the convener of TC 251 Working Group 3, which focuses on communications. And he was one of the people who helped develop the website and the KCO list, the known certified organization list. So these guys really gave me insight into how this came about and what some of the backstories were.
What can you share a backstory or two, or some things you learned from them?
Well, some of the things were, well, for example, probably the most interesting thing I learned was that, I was being real picky about the fact that there were organizations that couldn't demonstrate certification that listed themselves on that known certified organizations list. And what I learned from Boudewijn is that TC 251, although they absolutely, and they're a lot like the ALN in wanting the broadest view around the world of adoption of ISO 55000, and recognizing that not everybody who adopts it is going to want to seek certification. So they actually were intentionally loose about having to be certified to be on the list, which was, it makes perfect sense to me. The only thing that I feel is that we ought to be clear on the list who's certified and who's not.
Yes. Okay, so after you talked with them, what did you learn was important to call for in your paper?
Well, so what I realized was that the problem that we're dealing with, which is one, the fact that we can't tell who's certified and who's not on the TC 251 list, and two, we have sources of information from both the national accreditation bodies and from some of the certification bodies of other organizations that have been actually certified to ISO 55001. So there's an undercount on the TC 251 website that we can demonstrate. Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing is that problem, or those problems, are international in scope. And so the solution has got to be international in scope. And that means that takes me down two paths. One, working with TC 251 to put tighter controls on what gets posted to their website, and also modifying the website so that you can tell who's actually certified and who's not. And then working through the group that oversees the national accreditation bodies, and that group's called the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF, working with that group to to be more specific about what the requirements are for either national accreditation bodies or accredited certification bodies, making their information available to the public, so that the public has the most complete picture of actual certification as possible.
So then the underlying question to it all, why is this important?
I think, and I have long thought that being able to point to other organizations around the world who've seen value in certification, or if it's not certification, they've seen value in adopting the standard, is a great way to promote the standard around the world, and also in the US. And because people can say, I'm going to have to, hold on. I'm sorry, I need to mute myself 1 second.
Go ahead. So while Jack is dealing with a communications emergency, I will say that while Jack is the lead author, the senior fellows and the ALN board members were asked to review and comment on the paper. So Jack, after you finish saying why it's important, then you might make some comments about the contributions that others gave to the paper.
Well, in addition to the three folks that I mentioned before, Jim and Peter and Boudewijn, it was reviewed by you. It was reviewed by other people within the ALN community, and the comments that I got back were very, very helpful. I mean, it's clearly something that's sort of a niche issue, It's not something that most people would have even ever come across.
Oh,
And,
no. I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's something most people who go to that list on the website, the certified, known certified organizations would just assume that that name means that if they're on the list, they're certified. And it's just not true.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
And going back to your point of helping it propagate the standard, that's exactly what the ALN is hoping to do. So your efforts are totally supportive of the mission of the ALN, because companies see other companies there, then they might want to do business with them. They might say, hey, my competitor's doing this. And basically what we've learned, going back to your healthcare analogy, it's not a Band-Aid. This is a lifestyle change. And right now, the world needs all of the organizations in it to go through a lifestyle change, or everyone's lifestyle is going to change for the not better. So that's
what we in the ALN are all about, is promoting the adoption of the standard, because we believe that it has such positive consequences for people who do that.
Yes. So one of the things that goes back, because basically what you've got here is a trilogy of papers and presentations that kind of focus on similar issues. And can you go back and tell us a little bit about what you found out about the countries that have the most adoption of ISO 55000, why you think it happens, and how that might occur at other countries too?
That's a great question, Mike. What we found out, and the 4 countries that by far have the largest number of organizations on that KCO list, are Japan, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. And the story is somewhat different country by country. In Japan, they have a lot of adoption in the water and wastewater sector. And that's because they have a ministry there that's responsible for that. That's sort of, it's a typically, kind of an indirect way. They say, well, we're not mandating that you do this, but we think it's a good idea. We highly suggest it. And then they publish guidelines for how you do it. So
we know what that means in Japan. That
yes,
means do it. Yeah.
Do it, right. So that's led to it. And then other industries in Japan. I mean, Japan has, in fact, all 4 of these countries have long, strong engineering traditions and strong engineering communities. And so when one community comes out and says, well, we figured this out as a great way to move forward, other industries take note. And so they kind of do a copycat thing and say, well, if it's good enough for these guys, it's probably going to be good enough for us too. And so there's that kind of exchange. In the Netherlands, it's a similar situation in that they issued a national policy, which it wasn't called ISO 55001, but it kind of mirrored it. So all of these Dutch organizations that comply with this national policy, I mean, it's nothing for them to get certified to ISO 55001, because they're basically there if they meet their country standard.
Okay.
UK is a little different. Australia is considered by some people to be like really the first folks that really started looking into asset management the way we think about it today. And a lot of their municipalities and their states have long traditions in asset management. And when they were involved with PAS 55 when that was developed in the UK. They implemented that. They had something called the IIM, the International Infrastructure Management Manual, which was produced even before PAS 55, and put together a lot of best practices for asset management. So they have a long tradition, and the same in New Zealand. New Zealand also has kind of piggybacked on Australia's activities.
So what do you think can be done to help propagate it in the U.S.?
I think continuing, accelerating what we're doing, getting the word out, making sure that people are aware that other people have adopted it. One of the things we're trying to do in the US, what we've learned, and you've certainly been part of this learning process, we've learned that there are more organizations working on adopting ISO 55000 than are certified. And so by making that information available to the broader community within the US, we're hoping that will kind of create again, this kind of groundswell of interest in adopting the standard and moving on.
Hey guys, we are about in the last 5 minutes of the session, and so I'm wondering if we can try to answer a question that was posed.
What was posted?
The question was, what value do organizations get from the standard and from certification?
You want me to take it?
You go ahead, Jack, and then I'll relate a story.
So the certification is proof of having adopted the standard, and it's very credible proof because it's certified by an independent third party. But the real benefit is adopting the standard and implementing the requirements of the standard. The nice thing about the standard, and this is something that I had a hard time trying to explain to my OMB colleagues when Jim Dieter and I would go back and meet with him, is why is that? Government people, in the federal government at least, look at something that looks like a standard and think it's more guidance. They don't understand that it's much bigger than guidance. It's what you need, what an organization needs to do when it creates its own guidance. So it's this lifestyle change. It's not just a Band-Aid.
Yes. So I'm going to answer that in two ways. The value of following the standard has consistently given people 20 to 30% improvement in whatever they are measuring: productivity, profitability, customer satisfaction, whatever. You apply the standard to a certain area of your business or your entire business, and whatever you focus on, you follow the list of things to do, you're going to get dramatic benefits, mainly because you are involving everyone in the organization in a holistic approach with similar language. So everybody's talking the same language. You eliminate the Tower of Babel. The value of certification is different for different people. Commercial organizations might want to use it as a marketing or a competitive advantage. I was able to visit with the head of the Army Corps of Engineers civil engineering side, and he immediately said, "How do I get certified?" And I said, "Well, really, you don't need to be certified in order to gain the benefits. If you just comply with the standard, you will get great benefits." He said, "No, I need to be able to walk into Congress and show them that I am doing what is necessary to be the best in class." And I was like, "Oh, okay, then this is how you go ahead to get certified." So I hope that answers the question. Nick, did you have any others that were out there? Oh, you're on mute, Nick. So
sorry about that.
Okay.
The other question was just, where can I get the paper?
Okay, so the assetleadership.net website has a drop down that says papers, and you go down and you'll see the paper. I believe it's at the bottom of the list right now because it's the most recent one, Nick.
Yep, that's correct. And I'm going to post the link to the chat.
Okay, and then Jack's got other papers there.
Yeah, that history document that I talked about is also under papers, and it's called Asset Management, Asset Management in High Performing Organizations.
Yes.
And then the Where in the World presentation is under the Events tab, and it was for the last year's 2019 event.
2019 event, and then you go to that page and you'll be able to see that. So let me once again put up our where am I doing this? There we go. So thank you all for coming to this first broadcast of ALN Thursdays at 4. We look forward to seeing you again next Thursday when we'll have another talk with another one of the embarrassment of riches we have with all of our supporters and contributors. We'll be able to have great talks year round with the people we have. Thank you, Nick, for your technical support.
No problem.
And thanks to our sponsors and membership organizations.
And I would just say that, again, thank you all for coming. And if you'd like to continue this conversation or others, please feel free to reach out to any of us personally or send an email to webinar@assetleadership.net. And we hope to see you again next week.
Thank you, everyone. So Anderson and Mark, if you unmute yourself, you'll be able to talk if you want to say anything, engage in a more interactive conversation. I thought you should be able to unmute yourself. Maybe we have to do that.
It seems like they have the ability to.
But they're not doing that. All right, well, just thanks for coming. This was our first round. We appreciate you stuck all the way to the end, and we'll be editing this part out. All right, thanks everybody. Nick, you can go ahead and end it.
Right.
Okay.